Okay, strap yourselves in because today we're going deep on a case. Um, it's fascinating and disturbing all at the same time.
Sounds right up our alley.
Right. We're talking about young Xinhai,
Yeah.
China's most prolific serial killer.
Wow.
Yeah. This guy's crimes. 67 murders and 23 rapes. It's a scale that's honestly almost hard to even grasp.
Yeah, I can see that. The numbers alone are, well, staggering.
Exactly.
What makes this case even more interesting, though, well, to me at least, is that it all happens against, like, this backdrop of China in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So you've got massive societal shifts going on, right? Economic booms, growing pains of a nation that's modernizing so fast.
So right away, we've got like this whole complex layer of context we have to think about.
For sure.
But before we get too far into that, let's start with Yang himself.
Okay, sounds good.
Can you paint us a picture of his early life? Like,
Yeah.
what was he like?
Okay. So Yang Xinhai, he was born the youngest of 4 kids. Family was struggling. Poverty, not the easiest start. He was considered a bright kid, but really kept to himself. And then at 17, he drops out of school.
17, wow.
Yeah. And instead of going home, starts drifting around the country, picking up, like, labor jobs, that kind of thing.
It's interesting you point out the drifting part.
Yeah.
I mean, that lack of roots, of steady connections, it makes you wonder if that maybe played a role in what he did later.
You're thinking, like, does that kind of rootlessness make someone more likely to commit crimes?
Yeah, is there a link there?
Definitely something criminologists think about.
Yeah.
For sure. There's even a theory about it, social disorganization theory, they call it. Basically says that in places where people don't have strong ties to each other, don't really share the same values, you tend to see more crime.
Interesting.
So whether that fits perfectly with someone like Yang, debatable, but it's worth noting.
Okay. Yeah.
What's not debatable, though,
Look at that.
is the his criminal behavior. Like, it gets worse over time.
Oh, okay. It's like a
Hey.
pattern.
Exactly. He's convicted of theft twice, 88 and 91. And then in 96, he does 5 years for attempted rape.
So this isn't some sudden out-of-nowhere explosion of violence.
Bro.
There's definitely a pattern of escalation here.
Sadly, yeah. And it culminates in this absolutely horrific 4-year killing spree from 99 to 2003.
Oh, wow. Okay, let's talk about that spree.
Hi.
Like, what was his, MO? Did he target a specific type of victim?
His main targets were rural farmers and their families.
Oh, wow.
He'd usually attack at night, get into their homes, and then he'd use whatever he could find as a weapon. Axes, hammers, shovels.
That's just brutal.
It was horrifying. And the way he did it,
Yeah.
there was this chilling efficiency to it all.
One detail, when I was reading about this case, one detail that really got to me was his thing with the clothes.
The clothes. Oh, yeah. You mean how he'd wear new clothes and big shoes every time?
Yeah, yeah. Why do you think he did that?
To me, it points to a few things. First, this wasn't random. There was, like, premeditation. And second, he was trying to disguise himself.
Yeah.
He knew he had to cover his tracks. And honestly, that detail adds a whole other level of complexity to, like, the psychology of this guy. Yang Xinhai, he's a puzzle.
Yeah, totally. It's like he was trying to separate his everyday self from the persona he took on when he was committing these crimes.
Right, like a Jekyll and Hyde kind of thing.
Exactly. And that makes his choice of victims even weirder.
How so?
Well, it seems random, like no specific type of person he went after.
True. Very hard to predict.
Yeah. And that's just, it's terrifying.
Definitely.
And on top of that, the attacks, they seem to get even more brutal as time went on. I keep thinking about that attack in October 2002.
Yeah, that one was particularly bad.
He murdered the father and a 6-year-old daughter, and then he raped the mother, who was pregnant, by the way.
Awful. I'm glad she at least survived.
Me too. But the injuries, I mean, severe. It's hard to wrap your head around the kind of, like, depravity we're talking about here. What can you tell us about the psychology of someone who does this kind of thing?
Well, the FBI, they have this system for classifying serial killers.
Okay.
And based on what we know about Yang, it seems like he fits into the disorganized killer category.
Okay, so what does that mean exactly?
It means the crimes are impulsive, chaotic, not a lot of planning involved. He didn't hide the bodies or anything. The weapons he used, super basic, stuff anyone could get their hands on.
So not exactly a criminal mastermind.
Not really, no, but of course that doesn't really explain the why.
Right. The big question, always. What was his motive?
Yeah, at first, a lot of the reports, they were leaning towards this whole revenge against society narrative. Like,
Right.
maybe he'd just gone through a bad breakup, and that fueled, like, all this rage, this desire to lash out.
Hmm. I mean, breakups are rough, but is that really enough to explain 67 murders? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I'd say a broken heart doesn't usually lead to a killing spree across multiple provinces.
Exactly. So, what other motives were investigators looking at?
Well, the focus kind of shifted to this idea that maybe Yang was getting pleasure from the acts themselves.
Oh, okay.
The thrill, the power,
Yeah.
robbery, rape, murder, like the acts themselves were the goal.
Thrill kill idea.
Exactly. We see that in other cases. But does that really tell the whole story here?
Yeah, tough to say.
Especially when you consider what Yang himself said about it all. He once said, and this is a direct quote, "When I killed people, I had a desire. This inspired me to kill more. I don't care whether they deserve to live or not. It is none of my concern. I have no desire to be part of society. Society is not my concern."
Chilling.
Right.
Yeah. It's like he's totally detached, like a completely nihilistic view of the world.
You said it. This goes way beyond just wanting power or control. This statement, it suggests a fundamental disconnect from humanity itself.
So we've got this, like, glimpse into the mind of a killer, but we still don't really know why. Was it his upbringing, some kind of mental illness, or was it, as some people might say, just pure evil?
And that's where things get even trickier. This is where the whole context of China in the early 2000s becomes super important.
All right, let's dive into that then. What was going on in China during this time that might shed light on all of this?
China was changing fast, modernizing, economy booming. But that kind of growth, it comes with a cost, you know?
Oh yeah, I can imagine.
Tons of people moving from rural areas to the cities, like a mass migration, all those traditional ways of life getting disrupted.
Wow, yeah, that makes sense.
A lot of people felt unstable, lost even, like they didn't belong anymore,
Hmm.
especially those who stayed in the countryside or just couldn't keep up with all the changes.
Are you saying, like, that this whole societal upheaval thing, could that have actually contributed to Yang's crimes?
It's definitely something to think about. We know he was a drifter, never really settled down. Maybe he felt even more pushed to the edges in this crazy, rapidly changing environment.
Yeah, like the ground was always shifting under his feet, never any solid ground.
Exactly. But how do we connect that to what he actually did? The killings, I mean, that's the tricky part.
Right.
There's this theory in criminology, strain theory, it's called. It basically says that when people feel pressure from, like, the systems around them, they're more likely to snap, do something criminal.
Strain, huh? Like what kind of pressure?
Could be anything. Money problems, social isolation, even cultural stuff. In Yang's case, maybe he felt this sense of anomie, like everything was meaningless, no connection to society's values or rules.
Okay, so let me get this straight. He's adrift.
Yeah.
He feels all this pressure from, like, society changing all around him. And on top of that, maybe he feels like nothing even matters. Is that what pushes him to this extreme violence?
Could be. It's a possible explanation, for sure. But we can't forget there's a lot of factors at play here. It's his individual psychology, sure, but it's also the pressures of society, maybe even some plain old bad luck mixed in.
You're right. It's never simple. But let's go back to that quote from Yang for a minute. That thing about not caring about society, no remorse. Does that tell us anything?
Yeah, it definitely lines up with the profile we see in a lot of serial killers. Antisocial personality disorder, can't feel empathy, doesn't care about the rules.
Right.
But again, it's not so straightforward. His whole nihilism thing could be just part of his personality, yeah. Or it could have been made worse by everything happening in China at the time. The economic stuff, the social changes, it's all connected.
Like we're trying to untangle a knot, but each thread is a different part of his life, you know? And then the whole context he's living in, that's tangled up in there too.
Exactly. And while we're trying to untangle that knot, we've got to remember the cultural side of things. How people see serial killers, how they're dealt with, that's different everywhere you go.
Right, right. So how did China approach this whole case?
Well, their legal system, it's way different from, say, the US or Europe. They're all about swift justice, keeping order in society.
So the wheels of justice move pretty fast over there.
You could say that. Trials happen quick. And for crimes like Yang's, the death penalty, it's definitely on the table.
And in his case, they did go through with it, right?
Yep. Sentenced in February 2004, executed on Valentine's Day that same year.
Wow, that's fast. Some people would say that's too fast. Like, doesn't give you enough time to really understand why he did it. you know?
I get that. It's a valid point. There's this balance between, like, the need for justice and the need for understanding. Sure, a quick execution might make the public feel like justice was served, but does it help us learn about why these things happen in the first place? Not really.
So where does that leave us? We've talked about Yang's past, the horrifying stuff he did, all the complicated societal stuff going on around him. But the biggest question is still there. Why? Why did he do it?
And maybe that's the scariest part of this whole thing. We can analyze all the facts, dig into the psychology, the sociology, all that. But in the end, we might never truly understand what made Yang Xinhai do what he did.
Yeah. Not a very comforting thought.
Yeah,
But it does make you realize how important it is to keep asking those tough questions.
absolutely.
Even if we don't get a clear answer, just the act of asking, of searching, that can help us understand human behavior a little better. And maybe, just maybe, it can help us prevent something like this from happening again.
Couldn't agree more. It's like the more we learn from cases like this, the better chance we have of stopping those terrible things before they even start.
Yeah.
It's all about understanding.
Yeah, and that brings us back to you, our listener. We've gone deep on this dark and complicated case. Yang Shenhai's crimes, the mystery of his motives, everything going on in China at the time. What do you think? What are your takeaways from all of this? We've really gone through it all, haven't we? I mean, from the nitty-gritty of Yang's crimes to that whole societal picture. What really stuck with you about this case? What jumped out?
This one's hard. It really makes you think about, like, what it means to be human, you know?
Oh, yeah, totally.
On the one hand, you've got these awful acts, no regard for life. But then on the other hand, gotta remember, people are complicated. There's their own psychology, the pressure from society. It's like, where's the line between what someone chooses and what their environment kind of forces on them?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's easy to just call someone like Yang a monster. Case closed.
Right.
But to really get it, these tragedies, you got to deal with the messy stuff.
Right.
Except that there might not be one clear answer.
And that's where the work starts, right? Not just digging up the past, but using what we learned to make things better. Like, how can we stop someone from going down such a dark path in the first place?
You're so right. It's a call to action. We can't just say, well, that was terrible. Glad it's over. We have to learn from this stuff. Bring those lessons back to our communities. Understand people better.
Exactly. It's a ripple effect. The more we learn about cases like Yang Xinhai, the better we get at, like, stopping the next one.
It all goes back to understanding.
100%.
And that's really what we want you to take away from this deep dive. Yang Xinhai's story. It's dark, it's tough to stomach, but it's a chance to look inward, to grow as a society. So keep digging, keep those tough questions coming, talk about this stuff with each other. The search for answers, it doesn't end here, that's for sure. Thanks for joining us on this one. It's been real. Until next time, stay curious.